Today, we had the awesome privilege of getting to interview Dave Lipson. You might know him from ThunderBro or from the earlier years of CrossFit, or you might know him from his wife, who is a very accomplished CrossFitter. Dave was pressed for time, but it was an amazing time getting to learn from him. So today, he talks a lot about his journey from CrossFit, coming out of a baseball background, finding his love and fitness in CrossFit, feeling the challenge like a lot of us enjoy doing, and then getting from lots of injuries into bodybuilding. And in that process, he really loved blending the two of CrossFit into bodybuilding. And now he's kind of created what he calls ThunderBro. So very, very interesting philosophy. I learned a lot from him. I think you will too. Very knowledgeable, very fun, and very eloquent speaker. So enjoy listening. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to our podcast, either on YouTube, Spotify, or even on Apple. And if you could also leave us a great review, that really helps us grow our platform and get out former athlete content to more people. So thanks for listening, and here it is. All right, guys, I'm here with Dave Lipson, and we're going to jump into his story. So he's entrepreneur, got to take care of his own health, husband, and he's a dad, and he's got to pick his kid up in about 25 minutes, and I want to honor that. So we're gonna speed along. I'm going to cut the introduction down a little bit. You're a former CrossFit Games athlete, and your wife too, and you guys have kind of been really known in the sport. But I want to take us back to when you got into CrossFit, what it was to you, how you kind of got better at it, and then through the injury and transition to ThunderBro and kind of bodybuilding.
Yeah, let's just be crystal clear. My wife is a much more accomplished CrossFit athlete than I ever was, and most people ever were.
Yeah.
And she is also such a phenomenal person too. And I heard when we were talking, you were using the word like, yeah, we like to bring former athletes on here. And I think the truth is, I love talking about myself. What I love talking about even more is the story behind my story that I think a lot of your listeners could probably relate to. Because if you are like me, you're a lifelong athlete. And whether it was CrossFit or some sport that came before or after that, I think the common thread that bonds us is this joy of movement, right? This physical expression. My background was in baseball, and that was very much tied to my identity as a person growing up. And I think a lot of us who grow up as athletes, we associate our self-worth and value to our sport, not just because we're recognized and rewarded for it, because it's a vessel for our gifts. It makes us feel alive. It gives us a sense of joy. And being able to transmute that through your life from, I started with baseball, and then it was strength sport and strongman, and then CrossFit, and then bodybuilding. What I started to realize is that it's not about what we're doing. It's about how we're able to express these elements of ourself that really bring out authenticity, right? In who we are. And so for a lot of people like myself, it's not just working out. It's way more than that, because it means so much more. The joy of movement, being able to express yourself through athletic endeavors, being able to run and jump and lift and do CrossFit or high rocks or whatever. It's not just something you do. It's oxygen. It's oxygen for your soul.
Yeah.
So, but unfortunately, life works in a slightly different way. You're supposed to be evolving as you go, and everything has a time, and there are good times and there are bad times, but everything kind of has a time in your life where, it runs its course, and then you move on. And the only really tragedy is getting stuck and not being able to move on and not being able to evolve as a person or as an athlete. So, for me, it started with baseball, and I felt so blessed. I just knew I'm not going to go from baseball to a desk job. It's just not possible for me. It was like, there's no way. I would rather, it's like some people are just made that way, and I happen to be made that way. And I was like, there's no way I'm just going to do this. So I would have been a professional lumberjack after that. So, but luckily, in my baseball career, I was a very gifted baseball player and had a lot of natural talent. But towards the end of my career, I had some pretty big injuries and arm reconstructions. And that's what propelled me into training. And when I saw what I could do with my body in training, how I could kind of control my own destiny and apply a specific stress to myself and actually make my body change, I became addicted to that. And sometimes it's the element of control. Also, the joy of training, of pushing yourself, of playing that game. In baseball, it's like a daily game. So, you got to have a short memory, whether you're bad or good. The next day comes and you have this routine. And training was so similar. It's like every day you're in there competing and practicing and, trying to get 1% better and all that stuff. training was pretty natural for me. And then I think it's kind of serendipitous. I feel very blessed that I just happened to fall into a community like CrossFit that really helped me open up my mind to broaden my understanding of training, because my background in training was very traditional strength and conditioning, which is phenomenal. But some of the things that were kind of missing out of my traditional strength education was just a little bit more of this idea of like GPP, general physical preparedness, right? And it took me, I was training for baseball, and then you get done training for baseball, and you're like, okay, a lot of guys drop out, or a lot of people, when they're done with their sport, they have a hard time going to the gym because they don't have like anything to train for. But CrossFit gave me something to train for and to compete with. And same thing with like powerlifting and strongman. It became a continuation of that game. And so as long as you're willing to keep playing that game, there's a lot of fruits to be had. And you have to be able to kind of evolve and let things go, like I said, because I found CrossFit and fell in love with it and became a high level trainer and worked for HQ for a decade, teaching seminars and coached all kinds of games athletes. And, it gave me this wonderful platform to like reach an audience and share some of my gifts, but also an arena to develop as a speaker, to develop in knowledge, to develop in group management. And, those skills are so invaluable. And for my wife and I think a lot of athletes are probably listening, what you've kind of described to me is the same story. You have this competitive game of CrossFit, and at a certain point, you start to realize that it's really not serving you for what you want and need at this point in your life.
Mm,
Um, Looking back at CrossFit now, just the program, I think it's such a phenomenal program, but it's probably more suited for beginners. And a lot of people are like, what do you mean beginners? It's supposed to be like the fittest athletes on earth. What I mean by that is, if you just like teach the average Joe how to air squat and how to deadlift and how to do some pull-ups and push-ups, that's going to do wonders for them, just compared to what the status quo is in the fitness industry. However, there's kind of like this honeymoon period, right? This honeymoon period in the first 1 or 2 years, where like everything's getting so much better, and then you start to gain some capacity. And not only are you gaining capacity to work, you're also gaining capacity to hurt yourself.
mm,
Two things start to occur unless you move away from this kind of constantly varied format where it's like, let's just put stuff out of a hat and hope for the best. That's great if you're just like learning new movements and patterns. But once you have capacity and that has essentially kind of run its course, you end up with stagnation, where nothing is really getting that much better. But furthermore, when you don't have any kind of rhyme or rhythm, especially with regard to your training split or your recovery or what kind of movements you should be doing now that you're really super strong, you start to see injuries pop up. And that can really hamper the person like me who just loves this stuff, like loves the community, loves the intensity, loves the game. And it takes the wind out of your sails to feel like you're not getting any more, or even worse. I like to say for guys, it's kind of like having your what in the dirt. Um, because it's hard enough to train. It's hard enough to like carve the time out of your day and get there and you do all this stuff. And then like, you tweak your back and you're like, oh man, am I going to ever be able to train hard again? Like, am I going to
mhm,
be messed up the rest of my life? The expression of competing is really the highest level of that, where you're like really pushing yourself to the limit. And then there's this very undefined nature to the methodology where nobody knows like exactly what it is, because everyone has their own interpretation of it. So for some people, CrossFit is like competition programming. For some people, it's like, hey, let's get together and throw some weights around and do some kettlebell swings and burpees and have a party with some beer afterwards. Um, because you don't have a standardized format, you subject, it's like restaurants, like there are good restaurants, there are bad restaurants. You never know exactly what you're going to get. And I think that traditional background in strength and conditioning is really where I started to see a big advantage, having observed what happened to me and a lot of our athletes in CrossFit, being able to be like, okay, that's great. I understand the purpose and context of CrossFit. Now, how can we do this maybe like more intelligently so that I don't end up back on the surgery table with another spinal fusion, or Cami doesn't have to reconstruct her shoulder, or people are starting to kind of see progress again once they've plateaued. And so kind of moving back to that, I really, in about, was it 2017 when I had my back surgery, that was the aha moment where I'm like, okay, so something has to change for me,
mm.
because I'm going to go back and try to compete in CrossFit again. I think that's just like asking for it. And I've seen the mistakes I've made. So I wanted to explore just the art of growing muscle. and really look at hypertrophy training as a method to elevate my athletic performance, to support general physical preparedness, because it's just building up your hardware, fortifying critical areas of breakdown. And it was just kind of a fundamental switch where, about 75% of the program is just about building good quality muscle, using intelligent training splits, using really cool intensification methods to keep yourself progressing. And then maybe 25% is like the traditional mixed modal training. But even the mixed modal training, I would make a little bit simpler, a little bit lighter, and let a spade be a spade. And so from a theoretical standpoint, the big shift is moving from this GPP, general physical preparedness, kind of undulating periodization, where it's like anything and everything kind of mixed together, to more of what's called a SAID principle, which is specific adaptations to imposed demands. All that means is that you know what you want. You're pointing yourself in a specific direction so that you can see progress, because at a certain point, with GPP and variance, everything gets pretty good, but it's hard to get anything much better than pretty good unless you start becoming more focused. You mentioned something about longevity, and 100%, I think that like hypertrophy training is the ticket for longevity for multiple reasons. The first being like, muscle is your currency. As you get older, like you really want to garner and foster a lot of muscle mass early in your life to carry you, because as you get older, it gets harder and harder to maintain it. So it really is important to continue to nurture, and you can still gain muscle mass at any age, but it's like, do it while you have the advantage when you're younger. And for me, that was kind of like mid-30s. Is like, okay, I'm just going to focus on putting on muscle. The other nice thing about hypertrophy training is it takes those two common players associated with injury, which are typically speed and load, meaning like, hey, I went as fast as I could, or I went as heavy as I possibly could. And these are the two most common players that are going to, like, when someone gets hurt, they're like, oh, I got out of position and I went too fast and blah, blah, blah. Well, the truth is those two elements are really the enemy of good hypertrophy training. Because hypertrophy training, really like good quality hypertrophy training, it's not about making heavyweights feel light. It's about making lightweights feel heavy. And the way you do that is by applying intensification methods, things like just slowing down, right? Adding tempos, reducing momentum, adding pauses, using things like partials and drop sets and supersets and overload eccentrics and isometrics. These are incredible tools that like most people don't or underutilize at best. And there's like so much good low hanging fruit where if you're stuck, if you just kind of like first put the bumper lanes on, point yourself in a singular direction, and do hypertrophy training in a really intelligent fashion so that you're getting the muscle consistently close to failure, but not just doing it like the way you normally lift, right? Because your body's used to the way you normally lift. All the CrossFitters are phenomenal at cheating, right? They know how to kip and get momentum and get the bar in the most efficient. Hypertrophy training is like pin the muscle down, create tons of tension, completely exhaust it, and then have somebody help you with some more forced reps, and you're rocked. And then the other piece is now rest, which is another element that's not really part of the CrossFit model, is like having a training split where, we have a million different training splits with our programs. But for instance, for me, for a guy that is like, I've got very, very strong legs, I've got a lot of capacity, but my back is like, I know it's a weak point, handle one hard leg day a week, and that's it. And granted, I do it on Monday. I'm sore till about Thursday, but by the time the next Monday comes around, I'm ready to do it again. My back isn't hurt, and I have the ability to push and see progressive overload. So, I think a lot of people are under the assumption that like more is better, and I understand that, because we love the gym. It's a fun place to socialize, but like you do have to be intelligent about your training split. And then same thing with the volume. Like as you get older, a lot of people get actually a lot more adaptation out of lesser volume. So, and when I say volume in hypertrophy training, higher volume is like 20 to 30 sets of
Right.
work. Right? It might be like 4 to 6 exercises. But there are people, and this is part of the Mike Mentzer school of thought. He was a OG bodybuilder who was like, no, you should do one set as hard as you can. You can get, if you pick 3 or 4 exercises and just do a really hard top set out of each exercise, and try to like give yourself a ton of recovery between you do it again, and try to push, have a good training partner that allows you to create the intensity and gives you the safety net to actually go there. Most people see a lot more progress than just trying to like do the volume-based model. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you found that more people, like Metzger said, would be push those upper RPEs to 9, close to almost 9 plus, is better than going lots and lots of volume.
In like getting into hypertrophy training, first, I want to put this into context. Um, Most people don't really know what bodybuilding actually is. Their impression of bodybuilding is what they've read in a magazine, and then they went to Crunch or 24-hour fitness and did the 3 sets of 10, or, have looked at like Jay Cutler's like, oh, he just did sets of 12 or whatever, right? Or
Yeah.
there's a lot of different ways to bodybuild. The traditional like Mike Menser, Dorian Yates, who's the other, John
Ronnie
Meadows,
Coleman.
Mountain Dog, is kind of like very traditional progressive overload, 8 to 12 reps with good control to failure consistently. That's very, very effective. Another method is kind of more like the Lee Haney method, which is like a bit more volume, pre-fatigue exercises, long sets to failure. Tom Platt's another one who did incredible volume, like high volume. The
Yeah.
one commonality amongst all of these different methodologies is that you have to get the muscle close to failure. Like
Yeah.
whether it's high rep or low rep or lightweight or heavyweight, it has to be close to failure. But what I started doing is, before I even got into this, I read a bunch about the science of hypertrophy training. Like I wanted to know muscle fiber anatomy, just the anatomy of how muscles grow. I got a great text by a guy named Dr. Brad Schoenfeld. And when I was recovering from back surgery, I just read this text and highlighted it. And then I reached out to Brad, and he responded to me, and I said, hey, I'm a CrossFit coach, and I want to blend hypertrophy training with CrossFit. I told him my story about back surgery, and doctors say I can't lift heavy. I was like, would you ever be down for getting on the phone or doing something? And shockingly, he was like, absolutely. He knew who I was, which is amazing. Like, thank you, CrossFit, right?
That's awesome.
Well, I got to sit down for hours with Dr. Brad, and he just laid it all out for me. And I love his approach because he's like, there's no one right way. There's only context and compromise. And depending on where you're at in your life, your training state, your orthopedic state, where you're at in terms of recovery and, internal chemistry, there may be a different method that may be more appropriate for you. But we laid out a program that I was going to do post back surgery, and I was just shocked. It was like with 40% of volume, one rep max. I would do 8 sets of 8 reps with 3 seconds, 3-second negatives and 30 seconds rest between sets. And I put back 30 pounds post back surgery. I was like, this is outstanding.
Wow.
I took what I did, I wrote it into a program. The only difference with Brad and I kind of worked on was like, instead of doing it on machines, I was like, barbells and dumbbells, I want functional movements. Like I still want to practice moving athletically. So I don't just want this to be leg extensions. And so that was the only adaptation I made, was like, how do I bring this into a CrossFit gym? And then ultimately, there was this part of me that really didn't want to be faking it, So like for all the people that say that they do bodybuilding or hypertrophy training, like you actually have to do bodybuilding, which means you're going to compete in a show and know what it actually takes to transform your body and get on stage and create the physique and the symmetry and the size and the definition and really have your chops. Because in the world of CrossFit, my wife and I had good street cred. We had trained 17,000 trainers. She won the CrossFit Games. Like a lot of people knew me. A lot of people trusted me. So I didn't want to come and say like, I'm the bodybuilding expert, but I've never actually done anything with bodybuilding.
Yeah.
So my clinical experiment was myself. I was like, okay, I'm going to see if I can prove my method on myself and just show people what I'm doing. And there was a lot of interest. And, I competed in bodybuilding for 5 years and learned such a tremendous amount from some of the best minds in the sport, at the very, very top. My personal coach is a guy named Alan Watkins, and he coached me for 7 years, and he had turned 65 guys into IFBB pros. We trained it at Phil Heath's gym. We got to be around pro bodybuilders every day, just like soaking up knowledge. And the more I learned, I was like, man, this is like an onion with a million layers that all these people in CrossFit don't even know about, from lifestyle to the training methodology to the fueling status and the nutrition to the understanding of internal chemistry to the ability to recover. Like there's so much stuff that they're barely scratching the surface. And this is the answer when things tap out. It's just adding another layer of precision and accuracy to your training program and your lifestyle and, your nutrition plan. So, outside of eating meats, vegetables, nuts and seeds, some fruit, little starch, sugar, there's a lot more to it when you really have tapped that out and you're trying to level up. Okay, getting back to it. So yeah, competing in bodybuilding was phenomenal. And, as I kind of highlighted what I was doing, I wrote that book. One was called the, Hypertrophy for Functional Fitness, which is kind of all about the theory of how you can blend this together and how hypertrophy can be supportive of your athletic performance and reduce injuries and give you personal gratification and, keep you going. And then the program was the 90-day Get Huge program. But, in my training, I started getting exposed to all these really cool methods. And I was like, man, I got to show people this stuff. So I
Yeah.
created our Muscle Anarchy training subscription, which really blew up because no one had ever done back squats that way, or, it's like they're tasting it for the first time. And just like me, I thought it was so exciting, like finding a new toy and be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be able to get so much stronger doing this. My shoulder doesn't hurt. My back doesn't hurt. I can push. It's like breathing that new life into the athlete. And that was, our company now is, just had our 7-year anniversary. We've been
Awesome.
blessed to touch over 30,000 athletes with our programs, body transformation systems. Camille and I manage ThunderBro now. She does all the ladies stuff. She did the same thing. She got into bodybuilding and she takes all the ladies. I take all the guys, and we have incredible partners. We have an incredible staff. Actually, most of our staff are people who were in the program and felt so in love with it that they're just like, I just want to volunteer. And they ended up becoming, full-time staff members. In fact, one of them is running the company right now. So it's been an amazing ride, and I get such a thrill out of helping athletes, recreating that experience that I had with other athletes and sharing that, because I know how much it meant to me. Like going back to the opening remarks, I understand what it means to you as an athlete to be able to move and be athletic and go to the gym and push yourself and see progress. I understand how that is a fabric of your identity. It's your oxygen, it's your fuel, it nourishes your soul, and how hurtful it can be to feel like that's getting taken away from you. And I firmly believe that this is the answer for your longevity, to be able to continue to see progress and work your way through injuries and, continue that, evolve that story. I really believe, especially for CrossFitters, it looks like this.
Yeah. It's funny you say all this because I had a similar experience. So I did CrossFit since 2013. I loved it. Around 2019, 18, I started getting into, I hired a coach and we started doing German body comp. So we do some like aerobic, CrossFit mixed GPP stuff, and then a lot of German body comp. And I'm like, dude, this is so freaking hard. I cut my volume down because I was burning out. I had to I changed my career and was going through some stuff. And man, it was intense. It put muscle on me. I felt great. I burned fat. I looked better and I had less aches and pains. And then when I went back to do CrossFit at some point, I actually felt like I was better at the sport than I was previous.
Yeah.
Have you found that experience that people can blend the two better?
Well, let's go back to, I got lost when I was saying, so, that traditional like 8 to 12 reps with tempos kind of thing, that's great. But even that has a shelf life. So if you're banged up and that's the only play you have to create more intensity is just putting more weight on the bar, you're going to be out of options pretty quick, right? So there are different methodologies, like there's higher volume methodologies. There's things where it's like Charles Glass does a great job of like creating really challenging angles and doing slow concentration work and all kinds of neat stuff. What I did was I loved it all so much. I'm like, I'm going to put this all in the same program. And I organized the different methods according to what makes most sense as a strength and conditioning coach for your physiology. We start every day, and there's obviously like a lot of tissue prep because I don't want guys getting hurt. So every day we foam roll, every day we do banded stretches, and then we start with some plyometrics. And for a lot of people, especially as you get older, like that's a big missing element is like you need to practice moving explosively, but you need to prep your tissue to be able to handle it. And you need a good entry point with the plyometrics so you can progress it. But every day has an element of plyometrics for your elasticity and also to kind of prime your central nervous system. And then from there, we go into like the heavy mechanical loading stuff. So that's like the 8 to 12 rep top sets. It's usually one of our core compound lifts. That's like the Dorian Yates style of training. And that's kind of the one heavy thing day. And then we move to more of like that concentration work. Like maybe we're going to isolate a muscle and we're going to go super slow and create really challenging ranges of motion. And then the final mechanism, which is called metabolic stress, is just that super high rep pumping out stuff. Now, what they all do is I kind of think about this as casting a wide net because every athlete will respond to something different. But if I give them all of it, there's going to be something in the program every single day that you're going to respond to. And it's also a nice way to avoid like, all right, I'm getting banged up now doing all these 8 rep top sets with like similar movements. So I like that blend of the methods. I don't really subscribe to one. They're all very effective. And I think kind of in the spirit of CrossFit in some ways, it's like casting a wide net so that you get all the adaptations, but all of them are pointing towards muscle hypertrophy.
Yeah.
So obviously the really high rep stuff is amazing for like muscle stamina, for aerobic capacity, for ventricle elasticity, right? Like how well your blood circulates through your extremities. Like there's a lot of good health benefits for that. And we put that last in the program because not only does, like, when you do stuff like that, when you're doing like 3 sets of max banded push-ups to failure, you're just not going to be worth much after that in terms of being able to move weight. So it doesn't make sense from your central nervous system standpoint to have the ultra high rep, burn out the muscle fiber thing coming first. But what's really nice about it is if you've already done the heavy mechanical loading, you've created a lot of micro tears in the muscle, right? So you've done muscular damage. And when you do the metabolic stress work, the high rep stuff, it pushes so much blood into those areas and it actually facilitates healing before you even leave the gym.
Yeah.
So it's a great way to like leave the gym feeling good, but kickstart that recovery process. And one of the things I say is like, neither one of those are bad, but if you're only doing the ultra high rep stuff, you need the heavy mechanical loading stimulus to grow, to get the what is called the neuroendocrine response, right? That's just from the loading intensity and the neurological component of lifting heavy.
Yeah.
But you also, the high rep stuff complements that really well. But if you're only doing high rep stuff, you're going to be limited in your capacity to hypertrophy. So you got to have some heavy, is my point.
That's great. Listen, I got one last question because I know you got to get going. You got your little girl you got to pick up. When you were going from back surgery, coming off, talking to, Dr. Brad, which, by the way, his book, little drop of knowledge, there's an awesome book.
That's great.
Yeah. So one of the best ones on helping me learn how to do hypertrophy training. But
you can tell he's a knowledgeable guy because he never talks in absolutes.
Exactly.
People who are knocking other stuff and this is the only way, he's like, no. There's a million different ways.
Yes.
And context and compromise.
It was like the part I respected, but was most frustrated by in the book. Cause all of us want like the one way, but he was really.
But that's the thing about the nature of adaptation is like, there's a different season for everything, right? So like you may go through a phase where like you've done a lot of heavy, low volume stuff. And now, unless you change that, you're not going to continue to adapt. So your program should be evolving or should be undulating in some ways to help you continue to see progress. That method I highlighted to you, where you've got a bunch of different mechanisms at play in a single training session, that's a great way to avoid stagnation because you're always getting something a little bit different. So yeah, I mean, I think that everything has utility in the context. It's just, where you're at right now.
For sure. But when you were coming off the table, getting out of surgery, and Dr. Brad reached out to you, what was that process like going from, man, I don't think I'm going to be doing CrossFit anymore. I got to do something different. Like, where was your head at and how did you overcome that identity shift?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think a lot of the people probably experience something similar if they're at that point. There was like a mourning period where I was just really sad.
Mm.
One, it was like that was tied to my identity, like how fit you are. All of my friends were CrossFitters. My wife is a CrossFitter. I work for CrossFit. It's a social circle. And I'm like, I don't think I can really do this anymore. That was really sad. But when I took the step through that door and started exploring this whole new world, I was like, man, there may be something out there that's, has more value than you can even imagine. So you have to go with it with a hopeful curiosity and not, not be sad about it. Nothing is forever. And it just realizing when people get to the point, I remember he was lying on the couch and, Cammy was trying to help me pee and I couldn't move. I had the walker and all the stuff. I was like, I'm not going to be able to do this anymore. And it was kind of sad. And then furthermore, when I started getting into hypertrophy training, it was not like really welcomed very much either. Like the idea of a CrossFit staff member doing a bodybuilding show was not warmly welcomed. And then when I started putting this stuff out, it was not welcomed either, because it was kind of antithetical to their methodology. I see it as being complementary to, but this is a culture that's like very defensive of their territory. So, the information in CrossFit comes from CrossFit and most of the outside information they try to keep out. And so it takes a while, but now it's coming around, and I think I'm very happy to say, I think I was one of the first people to really blend bodybuilding and CrossFit together in a real way where it's like, no, you can do a bodybuilding show and still stay fit and do CrossFit. And like, I'll prove it to you. And we've had dozens of athletes that we've prepped for their first shows that are like in their 40s. Like, I just want to see how good shape I could get in. I just want to see if I can look the best I've ever looked at my 40s, because this stuff here is just like, I can't keep doing it. And it's an honest conversation athletes need to have for yourself. Do your goals match your actions, or is what you're doing in your gym reflective of ultimately what you want, but more so what you need for where you're at right now?
Totally. Yeah. It's funny. I did a bodybuilding show in 22 here in Lakeland. And I would say I was never a really great CrossFitter. I was good locally, but like it was way harder than any CrossFit competition I've ever had to train for.
It's so different. In CrossFit, the hard part is the workout. And in bodybuilding, the hard part is like the other 23 hours of the day. The workout is the best part of your day.
It is.
It's the one time of the day you're not thinking about food.
Yeah.
You're not nervous. You're going to be naked on a stage. You're just there to like move iron.
Yeah.
It builds extreme discipline, and it unlocks these levels that you didn't even know you had in terms of what you're able to do. And that low grade of continuous suffering for like, 12, 16 weeks of being in a deficit to get to the leanest you've ever been. And even vice versa, like, going through an accumulation phase and be like, all right, I'm going to see if I can pack on a ton of muscle right now and, eat good quality food and in a surplus. You're just scarfing down 6 meals a day. It takes a lot, but the hard part is not the workout. The hard part is everything outside of the workout.
I hear that. Well, Dave, thanks for coming on today, man. I appreciate you. And our listeners can check you out at ThunderBro. Where else can they reach out to you at?
So the website's thunderbro.com. The handle on Instagram is at ThunderBro, same on our YouTube. And then I'm at Dave freaking Lipson. And, we for our programs, we have a lot of different stuff, but our main things are the Muscle Anarchy subscriptions, which have a dozen different iterations depending on your equipment and where you train and how much time, and what kind of training split you want. We also have like specialty programs that blend it with Olympic lifting or powerlifting or hybrid athlete, kettlebells, all kinds of stuff. And then the body transformation challenges are really wildly popular. And that's where we combine the nutrition coaching with the training. And we have a shred challenge subscription, which is for reducing body fat and growing muscle. And then we have our Get Huge subscription, which is just about like packing on size. Cami does all the lady coaching. I do all the guys coaching. In fact, today, Cami and I have both done over 100 check-ins today where we're updating macros and nutrition plans. So we're getting after it for sure.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on, and thanks for your time, brother.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you, Blake. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you, man.
Yeah.